Hey guys, what is up? Welcome back to my channel. Microsoft just crushed its earnings and it also beat Wall Street's estimates. So in today's video, I'll be running through some of Microsoft earnings for Q2 of 2021. Some of the headlines that we see from Microsoft Q2 earnings for 2021 is Microsoft reports 17% revenue growth and Microsoft stock rose as much as 6% in extended trading on Tuesday. Another headline reads, Microsoft stock jumps after earnings crush Wall Street's estimates. And for this article, we read that Microsoft beats Q2 earnings and revenue estimates. It says that Microsoft came up with a quarterly earnings of $2.03 per share, beating Zacks consensus estimate of $1.64. And this represented an earnings surprise of 23.78%. Microsoft has performed really well in the second quarter of its fiscal year of 2021. Now let's take a look at the breakdown of Microsoft earnings and the company's guidance for Q3. First, we'll begin with a company overview. Microsoft's revenue for the second quarter of 2021 is $43.1 billion, and that represents a 17% year-on-year growth for the company. For its operating income, Microsoft reported an operating income of $17.9 billion for the second quarter of 2021. And if we compare the operating income for this year against the last fiscal year, Microsoft operating income of $17.9 billion represents a 29% year-on-year growth. And for Microsoft net income, for the second quarter of 2021, the company reported a net income of $15.5 billion, and that represents a 33% year-on-year growth. For earnings per share, Microsoft reported a figure of $2.03. And it represents a 34% year-on-year growth for the company's earnings per share. That's a quick overview of the figures and numbers for the company Microsoft. And we can see that across the board, Microsoft as a company has done really well in this quarter, with all of its main numbers and figures reporting double-digit growth. Next up, we'll take a look at Microsoft individual segments and how they are performing. We'll be taking a look at Microsoft business highlights. Microsoft has three main core businesses. The first is Intelligent Cloud, the second is Productivity and Business Processes, and the third is More Personal Computing. Now, we'll break down the numbers for Microsoft's three main core businesses. For Microsoft Productivity and Business Processes segment, this part of the business recorded a revenue of $13.4 billion for the quarter, and it represents a 13% year-on-year growth. If we exclude the currency fluctuation, the Productivity and Business Processes segment for Microsoft recorded an 11% year-on-year growth. These are the products and services that falls under the Productivity and Business Processes segment. We see that for Office Commercial Products and Cloud Services, revenue growth increased by 11%, and for Office Consumer Products and Cloud Services, revenue grew by 7%. And for LinkedIn, revenue growth for the platform is 23% for the quarter. And for its dynamic products and cloud services, the revenue for this part of the business grew by 21%. We are seeing solid growth for this segment for Microsoft. And for the second segment for Microsoft, which is the Intelligent Cloud segment, revenue for second quarter was $14.6 billion. And that represented a 23% year-on-year growth. 22% if we exclude currency fluctuations. Server products and cloud services for the Intelligent Cloud segment grew its revenue by 26%. And for the third main core business for Microsoft, the More Personal Computing segment, this segment generated a revenue of $15.1 billion, and that represents a 14% year-on-year growth. 13% if we exclude currency fluctuations. Windows OEM saw an increase of 1% for revenues. Windows Commercial Products and Cloud Services recorded a 10% revenue growth. And for Xbox Content and Services, there was a huge jump in revenue growth. And for Surface revenue, it saw a 3% increase. And for search advertising, it saw a 2% increase. That's a breakdown for the revenue growth of Microsoft's three main core businesses. And we see that across the three main core businesses, revenue growth has been impressive. For the first part of this video, we took a look at the numbers breakdown for the company Microsoft. We saw growth across the company and how the three main core businesses of Microsoft contributed to the growth of the overall company. For the second part of the video, I'll be taking a look at some of the key points in Microsoft earnings call, how the company feels about its performance in the current quarter, Q2 of 2021, and their guidance for the next quarter. For the second part of the video, we'll be taking a look at Microsoft's second quarter earnings conference call transcript. I've highlighted some points in this transcript for us to go through, so we'll be taking a look at this transcript together. Microsoft started the conference call saying that it was a record quarter for the company, driven by their commercial cloud which surpassed $16 billion in revenue and is up 34% year over year. And they included their commentary for the business landscape moving forward. What they said was that they are witnessing the dawn of a second wave of digital transformation sweeping every company and every industry. And they mentioned that it's no longer enough to just adopt technology. Businesses need to build their own technology to compete and grow. So Microsoft just confirmed what most of us already know, that adopting technology is no longer a luxury, but rather a necessity to compete and grow in this business landscape. Microsoft has positioned itself well in this new business landscape. One way it is doing that is through its Azure platform. Cloud business is one of the sectors that is expected to continue growing in the future. With that in mind, Microsoft is announcing 7 new data center regions in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. And it also mentions that it's adding support for top secret classified workloads in the United States. For that part, it probably has something to do with Microsoft's Jedi contract with the US government. And Microsoft also mentions that cloud usage is increasingly being adopted by all the different industries. Some examples include telecommunications and even the auto industry. Recently, GM and Cruise chose to partner Microsoft to make their autonomous driving software. Microsoft noted that it is seeing momentum in every industry for their cloud business. For Microsoft Dynamics 365, which is a product line of enterprise resource planning and CRM, Microsoft commented that they are taking market share as companies in every industry turn to new business applications to grow. And Dynamics 365 Commerce now supports both B2C and B2B e-commerce. And as more and more retailers adopt technology, Dynamics 365 stands to benefit from this shift towards e-commerce. Microsoft mentioned that sessions increased 30%. LinkedIn uses sessions to monitor users' usage and engagement on the platform. And we see that usage and engagement on the LinkedIn platform has increased by 30%. On top of that, LinkedIn's advertising business had a record quarter. LinkedIn's revenue is up by 23% year over year. Advertising was hit hard during the pandemic. However, we see that in the past few months, advertising has started to recover. So with that, we can expect that LinkedIn's advertising business to pick up in the future. For Microsoft 365, which is a line of subscription services, which includes Microsoft Office, Microsoft commented that flexible work is here to stay. The pandemic of last year has accelerated the flexible work arrangement in jobs, and Microsoft also stands to benefit from this change. So for Microsoft Teams, the company is seeing larger deployments. More and more organizations are using Teams to communicate with one another. And Microsoft mentioned that Microsoft Teams has nearly 60 million daily active users, or DAU, on mobile alone. Those are some really impressive numbers. And we see that in education, more than 200 million students and educators worldwide rely on Microsoft education products for remote learning. With the pandemic looming large and the increasing shift to remote learning and remote working, Microsoft stands to benefit from this change. The next thing that we'll take a look at is gaming. Gaming for Microsoft has recently been one of the poorer performers in the Microsoft business. However, for this quarter, gaming has performed really well. Microsoft mentioned that it surpassed $5 billion in revenue for the first time this quarter for gaming. And not only that, the launch of their Xbox Series X and Series S was the most successful in the company's history, with the most devices ever sold in a launch month. And they also exceeded $2 billion in revenue from third-party titles this quarter for the first time ever. Xbox is also gaining market share in the console market. One possible reason why gaming has been performing really well for Microsoft in this quarter is also because of the pandemic. With the pandemic, more and more people are staying at home now, and they're turning to entertainment to pass their time. And that is why we are seeing record growth for Microsoft for its gaming business. Microsoft noted the increasing momentum for their business and the expanding opportunity fueled by the structural change brought about by the rapid adoption of digital technology. We can see that Microsoft is really benefiting from this trend change. Now over towards the financial numbers of the business, revenue and earnings per share was up, which we have went through in the first part of the video. Microsoft mentioned that across our business, results has exceeded their expectations. So they are seeing double-digit top and bottom line growth. So that's some really impressive growth. They mentioned that for their commercial business, customers prioritize their digital transformation, which drove a healthy demand for their products and services. And they also mentioned that within their small and medium business customer segment, transactional licensing trends continue to show some improvement. And Microsoft also mentions that the overall PC market was stronger than what they expected, which has benefited their Windows OEM, Office Consumer, and Surface businesses. And on top of that, they also mentions that the advertising market continued to show improvement after the pandemic. And for gaming, they saw record engagement and monetization across their platforms. They also mentions that even with a declining expiration base and strong prior year comparable, commercial bookings increased 19% and 11% in constant currency. 19% is the increase and 11% is excluding the currency fluctuations. The sales of the subscription business for Azure and Microsoft 365 gave Microsoft better than expected results. Gross margin percentage for the company was 67%, which is up slightly year over year with roughly 2 points from the change in accounting estimate noted earlier. Then excluding this impact, company gross margin percentage was down. So this is something to pay attention to for Microsoft for this quarter. Because even though gross margin percentage has increased, the increase was down mainly because of the change in accounting estimates. But if we take away the change in accounting estimate, Microsoft gross margin percentage was actually down for this quarter. It mentions that operating expenses increased by 3% and 2% in constant currency. So the increase in operating expenses was not a lot. The next thing that we'll be taking a look at is operating margins. So Microsoft mentions that operating margins expanded 4 points year over year to 42%, including roughly 2 points of favorable impact from the change in accounting estimate and nearly 1 point of favorable impact from COVID-related savings. So if we take away the 2 points from the change in accounting estimate and the one-off COVID-related savings, operating margins actually increased by about 1 point year over year. So that is for the overall company results. The next thing that we'll take a look at is segment results. For the productivity and business processes segment, gross margin dollars, or the absolute gross margin amount, increased 13% and 11% in constant currency. They mentioned that gross margin percentage for the segment was relatively unchanged year over year, with roughly 2 points of favorable impact from the change in accounting estimate. In fact, without the change in accounting estimate, gross margin percentage has been flat. The next one is operating expenses increased 4% and 3% in constant currency, and operating income increased 19% and 17% in constant currency. So the increase in operating income also included the 5 points due to the change in accounting estimate. If we exclude the change in accounting estimate and without the currency fluctuation, operating income increased closer to 10%. And for the next segment, the intelligent cloud segment, gross margin dollars, which is the absolute number for the gross margin, increased 29% and 27% in constant currency. So they mentioned that gross margin percentage increased 3 points year over year, with roughly 3 points of favorable impact from the change in accounting estimate. Again, without the change in accounting estimate, gross margin percentage has been relatively flat. The next one is operating expenses increased 12% and 11% in constant currency, while operating income grew 43% and 41% in constant currency, with 10 points of favorable impact from the change in accounting estimate. So operating income grew by about 30% if we exclude the change in accounting estimate and without the currency fluctuation. For the third segment, the more personal computing segment, the gross margin dollars increased 11% and 9% in constant currency, where gross margin percentage decreased 2 points year over year. Operating expenses decreased 10% and operating income grew 25% and 22% in constant currency. So overall, across the three main core businesses for Microsoft, gross margin percentage has been relatively flat for all three main core businesses. However, if we take a look at the operating income for the three main core businesses has performed well. The next part that we'll be taking a look at is guidance. Microsoft guidance for its commercial business is that it expects another strong quarter. For its consumer business, they expect to see a healthy demand for PCs and productivity tools, though growth rates will be impacted by the end of support for Windows 7 last year. And for gaming, they expect a strong engagement on the Xbox platform and significant demand for Xbox Series X and S. They also mentioned that search and LinkedIn businesses stands to improve in the improving advertising market. And for their commercial bookings, a growing Q3 expiry base and a low prior year comparable is likely to drive a healthy growth for the commercial bookings. But they pointed out that the increasing mix of large long-term Azure contracts, which are a bit more unpredictable in their nature, is likely to drive quarterly volatility in growth rates. So what they are saying is that Microsoft expects some volatility in their quarterly growth rates for its commercial business. For its commercial cloud business, gross margin percentage will increase by approximately 3 points year over year, but this increase is again driven by the change in accounting estimate. So the improvement in Azure gross margin will be offset by revenue mix shift to Azure and continued investments to support their customers. So even though gross margin is expected to increase for Azure, the continued investments to support their customers means that overall gross margin percentage is likely to remain relatively flat. Microsoft is also expecting a sequential increase on a dollar basis to their capital expenditure, or CapEx, as they continue to invest to meet growing global demand for their cloud services. What this means is that in absolute number terms, Microsoft is likely to increase their capital expenditure in the next quarter and moving forward. The next thing that we'll take a look at is Microsoft segment guidance. So for their productivity and business processes segment, Microsoft expect revenue to be anywhere between $13.35 to $13.6 billion. Revenue for the segment in the current quarter is $13.4 billion. And for the next intelligent cloud segment, they expect revenue to be between $14.7 and $14.95 billion. Revenue for the intelligent cloud segment for the current quarter stands at $14.6 billion. And for the last segment, the more personal computing segment, Microsoft expect revenue to be between $12.3 billion and $12.7 billion. Revenue for the segment for the current quarter is $15.1 billion. Revenue for the first two segments, the productivity and business processes segment and the intelligent cloud segment, Microsoft is positive about the growth rate for these two segments in the next quarter. However, for the third segment, the more personal computing segment, Microsoft is expecting revenue for this segment to decrease from $15.1 billion in this quarter to around $12.3 to $12.7 billion for the next quarter. Microsoft expect cost of goods sold to be $13.1 billion to $13.3 billion for the next quarter. Cost of goods sold for this quarter, Q2 of 2021, stands at $14.2 billion. Microsoft expect cost of goods sold to decrease in the next quarter. And for operating expenses, Microsoft expect operating expenses to increase for the next quarter from $11 billion in this quarter to $11.9 to $12 billion in the next quarter. For the fiscal year of 2021, Microsoft mentions that their strong performance in the first half of the fiscal year and their positive outlook for quarter 3, the company expects to deliver another full year of double-digit revenue and operating income growth, as well as a healthy operating margin expansion, even after excluding the impact of the change in accounting estimate and COVID-related savings. So taking a look at Microsoft's overall guidance, we get a feel that Microsoft is positive about its future. Overall, for Microsoft's second quarter of the fiscal year 2021, even though there are some things to pay attention to, generally Microsoft has performed relatively well in this quarter. The company is also bullish about its future, as we can see in its guidance for the next quarter. Hopefully you guys have liked and learned something from this summary of Microsoft earnings for the second quarter of 2021. If you did, smash that like button because it will really help the channel grow and allow me to produce more content such as this. And if you are new to this channel, make sure you subscribe to this channel because each week I release one new video about investing, trading and the stock market. I'll see you in those other videos. To your financial success.